Go ahead and get started. It's just after 1. So, like I said, we're talking today about the ISP in the TheraP system. And for those of you who have already participated in an ISP or have written ISPs or maybe even heard this information a couple times, hopefully you'll continue to get benefit from information. We are still working through a couple cases, as most of you probably know, kind of bring those up as we get to that portion of the presentation. If you have questions, please speak up throughout or type them in the chat pod, and we'll do our best to get those answered as well. So we have a standardized ISP TheraP guide, and if these have been mailed or will be mailed very shortly, I believe all CSPs are getting at least 2 or 3 copies, and we have sent out enough guides to each case management agency for each case manager to have 1 copy. This is, I think we're on like our 3rd version of this already, so please discard the ones that are older. We have been editing and revising it as we go and as tweaks are made to the TheraP system and we learn new things about idiosyncrasies within the ISP itself. Again, these are also, I didn't add them for download. I know the last time we did a webinar, the download feature wasn't working, but these are available on the DHS DDD website. So there is a TheraP user guide, and then there is an ISP monitoring guide.
They're also available on the TheraP website if you go to the South Dakota page.
So to begin, we really want to cover sort of this the concept of person-centered discovery and planning, and really starting with that discovery and assessment is where the team process should start, and that information would be pulled together by the team. There's been lots of discussion about how those assessments are completed, who completes which assessment, and that will be sort of a team decision on a case-by-case basis. We are working to come up with sort of a more standardized timeline and process for how that's done. There's actually a group who will be reviewing a draft of that on Thursday this week. It just wasn't quite ready for this webinar, unfortunately, but it looks like probably about about 3 months prior to the ISP is when the assessments needed will be identified by the team, and those will be sort of assigned and divvied out. Those will be then collected by the case manager, who will enter the information, compile the information into that personal focus worksheet. And so that's the first step. The next part, one thing I want to hone in on a little bit is the trajectory, the life trajectory, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. We've had whole webinars on the life course materials and the trajectory, but this is a really good planning tool for annual ISPs to really just kind of hone in on what a person and or their family are wanting, and what a good life looks like, and identifying also the things that a person and or their family don't want. And talking about the life experiences that will lead to a good life versus those things that might steer them more towards a life that they are not wanting. So just kind of a reminder that this is a good planning tool and a good way to have conversations with people about the bigger picture and what it is they might be looking for in the future. So the ISP, we want to point out, is made of 3 parts. We have the personal focus worksheet, which is, like I mentioned, sort of the compilation of all of that discovery and assessment. I believe there are like 22 questions in the personal focus worksheet that address various areas of what's important to the person, health and safety, relationships. So it's a pretty comprehensive, it's not all-inclusive, but it's a pretty comprehensive document. And it has questions that are from the person's perspective as well as from others' perspectives. So kind of serves in that capacity to help round out the team discussion and what some people might identify as needed versus the person themselves. We then have the ISP agenda, which really serves as a way to pull forward sort of some team discussion about what the person's been doing for the past year, what have their goals, which goals have they been working on, what supports have been included in their plan, and also a discussion about some of those things that the division requires per ARSD, as far as a discussion regarding guardianship, personal finances, possibly med to manage behavior if that's applicable to the person. So there are several items there as well. And then the ISP agenda then feeds into, acts as a preparation guide really, and feeds into the individual support plan, which is sort of that final component of the ISP process. So we'll get into more detail about how this kind of all interacts in a little while, but the ISP is where the actual desired outcomes of the person, or the goals, as they've been called forever, are identified, as well as those basic action steps. Also, this is where the risks that might pertain to the person are included, and we'll get to that. There is an area called discussion records that we'll talk about. So this is kind of the result of the meeting and where everything sort of gets pulled together. So we have the personal focus worksheet, like I mentioned. We have some of the following questions. So a lot of you might remember when we first started talking about a standardized ISP, probably about 1.5 years ago now. And we really wanted to focus on using those person-centered practices in the discovery, and we had a section that was really focused on the discovery. So we wanted to hone in on that and really kind of adapting that once SERRAP was identified as the IT system. So knowing that, so knowing that the personal focus worksheet has some specific questions about what others like and admire, how does the person participate in their community, what are their strengths and assets, and so we've identified specific questions that that correlate with those original thoughts that we had that we really wanted to bring out in the ISP. And then you'll see at the bottom of this slide in the smaller print, there is...
If you are frequent...
Okay, looks like that got muted. All right, thanks. So there's also a reference to the services and supports star, so the integrated support star in the lifespan folder. So I think that's on the very next slide. So it looks like this. And this is really a way to help identify some of those relationship-based, community-based technology and personal strengths and assets prior to looking at those eligibility-based services. So if you go, I'm going to go back, but so if you really think about what are my personal strengths and assets, and how can that be shared and used, and kind of tying that into that community-based section. How do people spend time, like and admire, those are kind of all tied together. We also have the relationship map, which I think everyone is really familiar with as we represent it in the person-centered thinking training. And so identifying, again, those people who are in someone's life and the role they play, who's close to the person and who is maybe in their life but not as closely, as emotionally close to the person. So with the personal focus worksheet, for each question, as you're kind of summarizing all of the information based on assessments and that discussion with the team and the person, you can identify an agenda question that really prompts further discussion at the ISP meeting. So those can automatically be linked to the ISP agenda, which is the next step in the process.
Okay, so the ISP agenda, as Julie said, is the next step after the personal focus worksheet. The agenda is created by the case manager prior to the meeting. This can happen a few different times during the course of the year. It should be done annually at the time of the person's ISP. It can also be done if there's a change in services anytime throughout the year. And it should also be done initially. So those are the 3 times or the 3 types of meetings that we can use the ISP agenda for. Just a reminder for everybody to mute their lines. We are hearing some background conversation. So the next portion of the ISP agenda is the individualized items. This ties directly back to the personal focus worksheet. The 2 documents can be linked together. The individualized items are anything really important that comes up during the personal focus worksheet and should be priority areas to be discussed during the ISP meeting. In these individualized items, you can tie directly back to a specific question on the personal focus worksheet, and if you're reviewing the document in TheraP, if you click on the question that it's tied to in the personal focus worksheet, you can see all of the responses or all of the documentation from that particular question. So individualized items can be documented a couple different ways. Issue resolved is when you have one of these individualized items that you can discuss and doesn't need any additional follow-up, but just needs to be documented. Action plan can be used if there are specific steps that should be tied with that particular item. For instance, if it pertains to someone's person-centered goal. And then discussion record, if there needs to be more detailed information or if it needs to be pulled forward into the person's actual ISP, is where that can be documented as well. The ISP agenda also addresses a lot of areas that are in administrative rule. There are several required items that need to be documented every time. We've given direction that all of these need to be addressed in every ISP. We shouldn't be skipping any of these questions. We here at the division need to be able to see that all of these things have been talked about during a person's ISP meeting. I won't go through all of the different questions, but some of them include whether or not the person's received training in abuse, neglect, and exploitation, whether or not they've received the grievance training, if the team has discussed medications, the risks versus benefits, and whether or not the team has discussed the medication self-administration assessment.
The one thing I would mention about this is for some of the items in some of those required items that we would want to see the content, I think about the A&E training or the grievance training, that we would expect to see some evidence of what was provided to the person or documentation about how that training was provided. There is an external attachment section within the ISP agenda that those can be uploaded. And that does have some limited storage. I think it's 10 megabytes, I think. Yeah,
and if it doesn't fit in the external attachments, you can put it in the document storage as well. One other thing that I wanted to mention in this required items is there's a couple different ways for these things to be documented. A case manager could document it as issue resolved, and that's for any item that you can take care of at the meeting. It doesn't need any additional follow-up. You can also do, issue resolved should be, anything you can take care of right away. The discussion record should be used for anything that has additional action steps or that needs follow-up throughout the year. And then deferred is anything that might not be applicable to a specific person. For instance, if someone's not receiving alternative services, that is one of the required items, but if it's not applicable, they could mark deferred. So just to reiterate, we need to see documentation on all of the required items, even if they're not applicable. The case manager would just document that in this ISP agenda section, though. Okay, so the final document is the individual support plan. This can also be linked directly to the personal focus worksheet and the ISP agenda. The first section of the ISP is what's most important to the individual. This information should sort of be a summary of what was discovered during the personal focus worksheet and the ISP agenda. And what's listed here on the screen is some of the personal focus worksheet questions that can be tied directly to this part of the ISP. Okay, so the risk section of the ISP, there's a wide variety of things that TheraP allows us to put in this section. It could include medical risks, fall risks, medical conditions, but it can also capture some of the behavior information that we want captured in the ISP. So it could include alcohol abuse, behavior concerns, and rights restrictions. This is a pretty important section. The case manager should also attach any of the supporting documentation, like behavior support plans or rights restrictions, to this section so that it's all in one place and we can see the documentation and the team discussion about some of those risks. The service support section, this is a section of the ISP that's sort of still in progress. We're still trying to figure out exactly how this section works and how we will use it. The intention is for this to, I guess, sort of replace the service record and be a place where a one-stop where you can see all of the different services that a person's receiving, where they're receiving it, how often. This will include, once it's all finalized, will include all waiver services, as well as some of those additional services a person might be receiving, such as energy assistance, SNAP,
housing.
Yeah, housing assistance. So it should be a one-stop place where we can see all of the services and supports that a person is receiving. Like I said, this is still in progress. We're still trying to link all of the different supports and get all of those things loaded into the system for us to use.
So the next section of the ISP is the desired outcomes section. And so one of the things I wanted to point out is that there is an option to check this little box. It's really tiny on the slide, so I apologize, but it says action plan for employment/ATE services. And so with ARSD that was promulgated in August, there is a requirement that a desired employment outcome is identified in each ISP. We would really look at that for people who are of working age. And so then once that checkbox is marked, you'll see that there are boxes where you would select a reason for planning. And so that ranges from I'm making a plan to maintain or improve my current job, all the way through I don't want to work right now, or I'm in school and planning to work after graduation. And those categories align with that path to employment, that person-centered employment planning document. And so that document can be a guide for you to know which questions and which kinds of questions to be asking the person and what kind of the content requirement is. Sam, are you responding to that? Okay, thank you. So Sam is responding to the question that just popped up in the chat pod. So to just kind of, I don't know if everyone saw that, but the question was, is alternative services, is it okay to indicate that in this section? And I think that yes, it is. You would select the I don't want to work right now, or probably that would be the path that the person would be on if they're receiving alternative services. If the person is working and receiving alternative services, this might not be the most pertinent place to put that. So maybe they have something that we can that they can work on and that they would want to focus on with their job, but they're receiving alternative services while they're not working. That might be a different goal outside of this employment section. Also, we have just sort of the basic no, if a person is of retirement age, they would not be required to have an employment outcome identified. If you feel more comfortable adding that, you could put I don't want to work right now. I mean, that's if the person is of retirement age, we wouldn't expect them to have an employment outcome unless they want to be working. Some retired people choose to work. Also, when you're identifying just kind of a standard goal, those are being, the phrase that is included in THERAP is the desired outcome. And so what we really want to see is more of an outcome-based statement. So thinking about how we phrase that a little differently than it may have been in the past, we really want to consider how important to and important for are connected, and they really influence each other, and really no one does anything that's important for them unless there's a piece of it that is important to them. And when we know that balance always involves trade-offs, and none of our lives are ever in perfect balance. So keeping that in mind. And so to give some examples or some guidance on how those outcome statements should be written, we really want to begin with the end in mind. So we want to include that action verb or phrase, only using I, such as if it were my ISP and Sam were writing it, she would only use the term I in writing as me for if she were absolutely sure that Julie would say it in that same way. If the team finds it helpful, complete that statement with how it will make a difference, using a phrase such as so that or in order to. So there's an example here that says Jacob lives in Johnsonburg, Cynthia walks in her neighborhood, Suzanne works at Pizza Hut, as some of those examples of that verb, that present tense of verb, because that would be the outcome, is that Jacob lives in Cynthia walks in her neighborhood and Suzanne works, is that kind of that end result that we're aiming for. So then we're tying that with so that he can see his family every week. So Cynthia walks in her neighborhood in order to stay connected to her neighbors and stay active. Suzanne works at Pizza Hut so she makes enough money to increase her independence and do the things she loves to do. So we're really tying it to the reason that that's important to the person. And in some cases that might be the reason that it's important for the person. So some examples of traditional services and programs, or some of those traditional goal statements versus the outcome statements. Judy taking a shower with physical guidance, that translates to I look nice when I go to school so the other kids talk to me and invite me to join them at lunch. That's much more specific about why it's important either to or for duty to shower and have that assistance. So Faye exercising 3 times a week with verbal prompts versus Faye practices her karate so she earns her orange belt and stays fit. That to me is so much more specific. If I were a staff working with Faye, I would know what that looks like. I would know that even though I might like to run, if I ask Faye to come on a run with me, she might refuse. That's maybe not her thing. But if I know that she wants to go to karate, that takes us down a whole new path. And it gives me an idea of what she's really trying to accomplish with that. Anna participating in a social or recreational outing. Anna participates in City Garden Club and is an active member this year, so she's not bored and makes new friends. So just kind of some examples of what we would be looking more for. So one of the things I want to mention, again, this is a very small screenshot, so I apologize, but if community support providers are using ISP programs to document in their own TheraP account that progress and what the person is doing, that can be uploaded, I believe, into the secondary accounts and for easy access for case managers to see what the person has been doing. You'll also see that there's the action plan with the desired outcome statement, which is sort of what we just talked about, and then there's a description of measurable steps, and so there's a series of those, and within that ISP meeting, I think there's been consensus that everyone needs to walk away knowing what that desired outcome is, as well as some of those basic measurable steps. So the case manager would be responsible for entering the desired outcome and some of those basic measurable steps into the ISP once the meeting has been held. However, as we discussed last month during the webinar, the CSP would then be responsible to take that back and really figure out, for example, what staff need to do to help Faye get to karate each week. So does that mean driving her there? Does it mean arranging for a bus ride? Do they have to stay with her? So that very detailed instruction for staff, that's something that the CSP will develop and staff will be documenting on. We all have those things that DSPs are documenting and kind of checking off that, yes, we provided the support and we helped this person do A, B, and C. So the CSPs are responsible for writing those specific sort of objectives or those those action steps. Thank you, Jennifer. Then we have the discussion record, and this is really where the team and the case manager will enter information to document what staff need to know to support the person on a day-to-day basis. It's intended to capture those items requiring action within the ISP agenda or the ISP itself. And one thing that sort of got lost in the shuffle when we were first kind of making the switch from our thoughts around that standardized ISP to the TheraP system and how it was structured, one of the things that sort of got lost in the shuffle was those day-to-day supports that people need, like reminders for toothbrushing or just those basic activities of daily living sorts of things that staff provide all kinds of assistance for. And so what we would ask is that those be captured in discussion records. So that gives the team, so it's documented that those things have to happen. And again, the CSP is responsible for the detailed instruction for what staff need to do on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis for those. But the general support would be captured in discussion records by the case manager.
So approving the ISP is something that we're still working on, and that will be a topic of discussion with the sub-work group that meets every couple of weeks. We have created, though in the meantime, this signature sheet that identifies who was at the person's ISP meeting and which of those individuals are active team members and those people who are guests. And this helps us to identify those individuals that should be receiving copies of various documents like the ISP or of quarterly monitoring, and those people who might just be there as a support for the person. For example, a person might invite their priest to be a part of the meeting and talk about things that they've accomplished over the course of the year and help in the development of ongoing goals, but that person doesn't necessarily need to see all of that person's medical information or some of that more private information that they might not want shared. So,
or even quarterlies.
Right, or even quarterlies. So this helps us to identify which of those people who are actually at the meeting are team members and should be sent the documentation, or those who are just there as a support or just there as a guest. And this can be uploaded as an attachment or to the ISP or into document storage. All right, so special team meetings. If there needs to be a change to someone's goals, for instance, or anything else that's documented in that third ISP document, a change form can be used, and that change form allows for documentation as to the reason for the change, the specific changes that are being made, and where those changes are being documented. That then allows the case manager to make changes to that actual ISP document. One thing that we have discovered recently is that we can make changes to the ISP agenda. For instance, if you need to make changes to any of the information that's in those required items, some common examples would probably be changes to guardianship, changes to a person's alone time, things of that nature. And you can do that by changing the dates that are in the ISP agenda. And there's more specific information on how to actually do this because you can only have one ISP agenda open at a time. So the just to give you a brief overview, the case manager will have to copy the current ISP agenda, and then in the original one, you have to change the end date to the day before you're making the change effective, and then start the new ISP agenda with the updated information. So, like I said, there's more detailed information about the steps to go through to update a person's ISP agenda in the updated guide that's on both the DHS website and the THERAP website. All right, so quarterly monitoring is our final section. The case manager is responsible for doing quarterly monitoring. Each quarter should cover a 3-month time period. We understand that during this first year, some quarters may be 2 months or some quarters may be 4 months based on the person's ISP and when they started case management and trying to get everyone on a consistent schedule. So we do understand that, but typically a quarter should cover a 3-month span of time. Part of the quarterly monitoring includes observation. Case managers have the option of doing observation multiple times over the course of the quarter. It needs to be done at least once per quarter, though. If a case manager wants to do it more than once, you do have to make sure to click the add button so that everything shows up and that you can add more than one. The observation should happen in a variety of different places. Residential, day program. It could potentially happen at a person's place of employment. We should keep in mind, though, that that could be disruptive to the person's place of employment. It's recommended that if a participant is struggling in a particular area or at a certain time during the day, that the case manager do observation so that they can get a better idea of what's going on and meet with the team if needed. Participant involvement and observation are two distinctly different things. Participant involvement is about getting input from the participant about how things are going, progress towards goals, things of that nature, while the observation is actually seeing the delivery of HCBS services. There is a section on the quarterly monitoring that allows for involvement from all team members, including the participant, their parent or family or guardian, and from the community support provider. And we've set it up to use a working, not working, so that everyone can identify things that are going well during the quarter and those things that the team may need to discuss or work on further. The case manager should also be documenting the progress towards a person's goals and whether or not the ISP is being delivered as written and agreed upon by the team. We've included a screenshot here of what that section of the quarterly monitoring looks like. There is a section here to go over the goals, the objectives, the progress to those goals, and any revisions that are needed. This should be done for each of the person's goals. All the goals should be documented separately. All of the progress towards the goals shouldn't be documented in one section.
I would just add that this is where it'll be really important for that good detailed information to be carried over from the CSP to the case manager in order for them to really know what the person has been up to related to that particular goal, and whether or not they're making progress, or if something maybe needs to be adjusted or tweaked within the goal itself or the action steps.
One other thing that we've included in that section is a place for action steps. So if there needs to be a change to someone's goals or some of the objectives or supports for that goal, the case manager can document what changes are being made, who is going to make those changes, and when those changes are going to happen. That's important to know because in this next section, there's a place for follow-up completed since the last quarterly, and if we can refer back to and see all of the action steps and things that need to change from the last quarter, we can refer back to that during the current quarter and document whether or not those things actually changed and what progress has been made towards those action steps. There's also a place on here to document the analysis of incidents that occurred during the quarter. So this is where we would get a summary of all of the, not just the critical incidents, but any internal incidents that the agency has, any medical appointments, any changes to a person's medical history, anything like that would be documented in this section. Then again, we've added a place for action steps. So if something came up during that analysis or something needs to happen or change with that person's supports, we can document it in this section about what those action steps are and who's going to complete them. Again, so the next time you do a quarterly, you can follow up on whether or not those things actually happened. Okay, there's also a section on the quarterly monitoring for an update to discovery tools and assessments. The discovery section in that personal focus worksheet really should be a fluid document and be updated as needed. or as things change for the person. So this portion of the quarterly monitoring allows you to document if there needs to be new assessments or you need to update any of the discovery tools. You can then describe those and then identify or explain any significant changes that happened over the course of the quarter. Some of the things that you can document in this section or might require additional information here are if there are changes to relationships, if people have moved to a different home, changed jobs, things of that nature. We do have a specific health section on here to document any medical appointments, if there are follow-ups to those appointments, who they're with, if there are any changes needed to meet the person's health needs. And then again, we've included the action steps on here, again, so that we can document what needs to change in this particular area and who's going to do those things. The last portion of the quarterly monitoring is sharing it with team members. This is a part of the administrative rule. It needs to be shared with all of the team members, which is why that signature sheet from the ISP identifies who are team members and who are guests. The team members should all receive a copy of the quarterly monitoring. This section allows the case manager to document how they're going to share these things, whether that be email, mail, whatever the case may be.
So with that, our ISP spiel has concluded, but I would imagine that there might be some questions. Like I said, this is a very basic overview, and the guide itself has a lot more detail around content requirements within each section, as well as sort of the logistics of completing those different pieces of the ISP. So I guess I would just ask now if there's anyone who has any questions, either through, I don't see any new questions through the chat box, but if anyone wants to kind of speak up and ask over the phone line.
We did have something in the chat box about the signature, not the signature sheet, like the attendance sheet and the identification of team members versus guests. We are working on the formatting of that document so that there are more lines. And as soon as it's completed, we'll get that out to everybody.
It looks like there are a couple questions. So the first one is, if the CSP is reviewing med use for a diagnosis as a rights restriction, do we add that into the quarterly under rights restriction? I think you certainly could. We'll see that there's an associated diagnosis, but that is part of administrative rule that goes through that annual review now. So it probably would be a good idea to add just as part of that quarterly review that due process has happened. The next question is, where are we to put the social history information? It's said to attach to the ISP with again, the limited storage. And throughout the year in the individual data area. So we've looked at the individual data form, am I saying that right, IDF, as a potential way to document that social history. But in my opinion, and I know that Sam agrees, I think that the individual data form is lacking a few components of what we would really want to see in a social history, as far as like family background or significant relationships in the person's life. I mean, it's very much a kind of demographic sort of form. If there's a way to add more information that I'm not aware of, I think we could talk about that more. But I think that attaching it to the ISP or in document storage is where I've seen others store that, and there's not right now like any standardized template or anything for that. So, okay, then our next question is the timeline for the CSP to receive the outcome wording. You know, I guess that outcome would probably, just off the cuff, maybe, I was picturing that as being developed or identified during the ISP meeting. So what does the person want to do and why do they want to do it? It's something that hopefully could be discussed at that annual ISP. So hopefully, the person and their team would walk out knowing that basic information and some of the basic steps, those action steps to help get them there.
Well, and that's part of the timeline that Julie was talking about that's going to be discussed with the subcommittee. So I think more detailed information might be coming out about that once that's been reviewed by the subcommittee.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at, okay, there's a question here about the CSP sharing with the rest of the team. Is it okay if the CSCM document that was shared with the CSP contact? I'm guessing that you mean the quarterly, is that correct, Katie? Is that if the quarterly is shared with that internal CSP contact?
Yep, that's what I'm asking. And I'm not talking about the guardian or participant. I'm only talking about the rest of the CSP team.
Right. I think that would probably suffice. I don't know. It would be nice on the other side to see somehow that it was in fact distributed, but I don't know how we might manage that. So that might be a little bit more conversation down the road. But I think for now that would be acceptable.
Yeah, there's just the box on there, describe how the quarterly was shared with the team. I would just document that you shared it with the CSP contact.
Mm-hmm. And then Jan said that you can't add other topic areas in the IDF, so maybe it would be beneficial for that sub-work group as an agenda topic to talk about what other topic areas we might want to see as sort of a standard that would comprise a quality social history. Any other questions? I'm sure that cleared everything up for every single person on the line, all 112 of you. The medical history. Emily, would you care to chime in on the medical history?
Yep, I can chime in. I guess I've seen it a few different ways, kind of the same as the social history. I mean, if you were to get some sort of medical history, I know some of the agencies use TheraP. I know it prints off a nice history with their diagnosis, their current meds, allergies, the doctors they see. I think that's very appropriate. If not, I would just, on the case manager end, I guess I would encourage you to work with the CSP to get some sort of med history from the CSP, and you can just upload that to document storage. The main things I guess I would be looking for is a list of active diagnoses, list of active medications, and those are, I mean, not every PRN or they run an antibiotic for a week, but those long-term medications. The physicians that they see, you know, if they see an endocrinologist or a heart doctor or their primary physician, their dentist, those sort of things. Those are kind of the main things I would be looking for.
Okay, thank you. And you are very welcome for our attempt to provide clarification. I guess with that, you know, I guess I will give one more, you know, third time going once, going twice, going 3 times chance for questions. Other than that, again, the guide documents can be found either at the DHS DDD website or the TheraP website. And I believe that this presentation will be added to the DHS website as well under that resources, I think, the resources. So thank you everyone for joining us, and if you have any further questions, I've added my own, Sam's and Donna's. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.